Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. Welcome to my April wrap-up, where I will be talking about all of the books that I managed to get to in the month of April, which April was a pretty good month for me. I managed to fit in, I think it was 15 books. And so yeah, that's pretty good for me. I got away from my TBR quite a bit this month, and in fact, I did a lot of mood reading. And I'm starting to do something on my community page on my YouTube channel where I'll just put up a poll of like 4 like really random ass books from my Goodreads TBR list. Like I'll do a random number generator and it'll just randomly pick out 4 books for me. I'll put them on the poll and then you guys get to decide what I read. So I did that a lot in April and I'm still continuing to do that this month in May. And it's a lot of fun just to see, first of all, like which books are randomly chosen. And then it's really interesting to see which books y'all want me to read. And sometimes it goes really well. Other times, as you'll see, it does not go very well. But it's still very fun. I much prefer mood reading now to making like long, expansive TBR lists. Even though there are books that I want to get to every month that I'm excited for, it's a lot more fun for me to just mood read and to just like be very random about what books I read every month. It's very chaotic and I love it that way. So hopefully you guys have fun watching this wrap up because it's going to be me talking about a bunch of random ass books. Just like, what are these books? But yeah, let's get into it. Yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So speaking of the polls on my community tab, one of the books that won the poll, I actually ended up DNFing. And I was super bummed out about this one because I've been excited to read this one for a long time. And it just did not work for me. Very, very unpopular opinion, as you'll see. It's because the book is Exhalation by Ted Chiang. Hopefully I'm saying that right. But it's like a modern sci-fi short story collection. And I love sci-fi short stories. Like Ray Bradbury is one of my all-time favorite writers. He's my all-time favorite short story writer, and a lot of what he writes is sci-fi. So I thought it would be really fun to like jump into like a modern sci-fi writer and to see how his short stories work out. They just did not click with me. I think the first one is like, it's like a kind of a sci-fi time travel fairy tale. And it really didn't work for me. And then the second story, like I got what he was going for, but it just was so boring. The third story is like 2 pages and it was nothing. I got kind of excited for the premise of the novella that's in here called The Life Cycle of Software Objects. But just, you get halfway through it and I don't give a crap about any of the characters. He's clearly not focused on the characters, which, you know, is a common theme for sci-fi, for a lot of sci-fi. Modern sci-fi authors are getting better about, like, not solely focusing on the sci-fi elements and, like, the philosophy or the ponderings of science fiction, or not science fiction, but, like, science, and, like, having good character work in their stories. But for me, Ted Chiang did not do that at all. All of the characters fell flat for me. I didn't care about any of them. I really just did not care for this, and I got halfway through that novella, and I was just like, this is not for me. So that poll did not work out exactly, but, you know, it's fun to try out new stuff, right? And now I know that Ted Chiang is just not for me. So that was my worst book of the month because I DNF'd it, but luckily that was my only DNF for the month. The next book that I'll talk about is the lowest rated book that I read in the month of April. It started out with such promise. I was really enjoying it. And then the second half of the novel it was just so stupid, and I really didn't enjoy it. And that would be Reckless Girls by Rachel Hawkins. Now, I initially wanted to read this because Rachel Hawkins wrote a book last year called The Wife Upstairs, and I loved that book. I gave that book 5 stars, one of my all-time favorite mystery thriller kind of books. And so I wanted to read this, but I heard mixed reviews from it from a lot of people, so I wasn't sure if I should read it, but I was like, you know what? It's Rachel Hawkins. Maybe I'll enjoy it. And I did enjoy it for the first half of the book. You get introduced to the character and the premise, and it was going good. And then, I hate when authors do this, but like, the first half of the story is told from like one perspective. So the author kind of sets up the promise like, oh, this is going to be her story. It's going to be told through her perspective. And then he or she just starts randomly introducing new character perspectives. And you're just like, why? Like, I don't care about these people. And then the direction it goes in, obviously I won't spoil anything, but the direction it goes in is just so stupid. And the ending is just laughably bad. Like, I thought it was so dumb. And yeah, it's a messy book, but it was hard to rate because I really liked the first half of the book, but then the second half is just so bad. But I ended up giving it 2 stars just because it was that bad. So yeah, Reckless Girls by Rachel Hawkins. Not a good book. I highly recommend her other book, though, The Wife Upstairs. That was actually a good book, but not this book. And now, talking about unpopular opinions. Man, I have not had good luck with this author. I didn't hate this book. I somewhat enjoyed it, but I was pretty much underwhelmed by most of it. I ended up giving it 3 stars. It's by Neil Gaiman, and it is The Ocean at the End of the Lane. I had high hopes for this, even though I DNF'd 2 of his other books, American Gods and Good Omens, which was also co-written by Terry Pratchett, who I've also haven't really vibed with. But yeah, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, I thought was going to be great because it was sold to me as a dark fantasy, and it had like horror elements to it, which it definitely does. But I didn't really care about the main character. That's pretty much my problem with it. Like, it had interesting stuff going on in the background, and everything around the main character was somewhat interesting. But for me, in order for me to like care about what's going on, I have to care about the main character and like who this is happening to. And I really don't think Neil Gaiman did a very good job with that. Because really, like, you get introduced to the main character at the beginning, and he's an older character, but then you kind of flash back to his childhood. I wish we would have more time with the older character, the older version of himself, so like we could get attached to him. But we really don't get that. And you just kind of jump into what happened to him in the past, and I really didn't care that much about it. I mean, I did enjoy it overall. I gave it 3 stars. It was written fine, but overall, it just didn't really leave that much of a lasting impact on me. It was fine. Like, it was okay. It was better than Reckless Girls, I'll say that much. But I don't think I'll be reading any more Neil Gaiman. This is probably my last by Neil Gaiman. It was fine. The next book I have to talk about is a horror short story collection titled What One Wouldn't Do. Now, I've heard great things about this from people like Leslie from The Nerdy Narrative and my good buddy Sharon Dwyer. They both really liked this collection, and I've actually been kind of slowly making my way through this since Sharon Dwyer gifted this book to me, and she's been kind of on my ass about finishing this book. So I finally decided to wrap it up in April, and I'm glad I did because there's a lot of great short stories in here. My issue and why I didn't give it a higher rating, I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars, is because there's a few, I mean, while there are some really great short stories, very memorable, very creepy, very atmospheric, I loved a lot of the short stories in here. There's quite a few that didn't really leave that much of a lasting impression on me. And then there's like a handful of here that are just like poems of like, like free range poems that like I just didn't really vibe with. I didn't really care too much. But then, there's those really good short stories that are like top notch, like really good. So it's kind of hard to rank because of that, but I decided to just kind of just split it in the middle and then bump it up like a little bit because like the really good ones are really good. So I settled on 3.5 stars. I do recommend this because it's very, very good, a very good collection. But yeah, I'm finally glad that I decided to go ahead and finish this and get Sharon off my back. You're welcome, Sharon. This next book is pretty funny because like with some of these books, I put up a poll on my Discord and my community page, and I wanted to read like a nonfiction book. So I put up 4 nonfiction books, and this is not the book that I anticipated winning. I put up a Led Zeppelin biography, and I was assuming that people would vote for that, either because they liked Led Zeppelin or they knew that I liked Led Zeppelin, that I love Led Zeppelin. But like, by far, people really wanted me to read Betty White, which apparently, I guess I underestimated how much people love Betty White. I mean, I love Betty White too, but I don't know. I kind of wanted to read Led Zeppelin. But I'm glad I read this. I gave it 4 stars. There's nothing bad about this book. Like, it's a perfectly good sort of like small memoir. The problem is, like I said, it is small. It's only like 200 pages, and it's very big font, and half of the pages either have like pictures on them or they're blank. So I read this in like less than 2 hours. So it went by really quickly. I wish there would have been a little bit more meat on the bone. Yeah, that's my main complaint, but it was pretty good. Like, it was a fun time. I just wish there would have been a little bit more to it. Like, a little bit more effort could have been made into like expanding everything. But I mean, it was a perfectly fine memoir of just like random tidbits from her life. It was good, 4 stars. Probably not something I'd ever read again, but it was pretty good. So I am glad I read it, but would have been nice to read that Led Zeppelin biography. This next book also won a poll on my community page, and it was pretty surprising because it was going up against some pretty popular books, including, I believe, Jade City, which was winning at first, but then this book kind of took over at the last minute, and it won somehow. But I mean, she's pretty popular author. It's Agatha Christie, and it's a Pocketful of Rye, which initially I wasn't super excited about because it's a Miss Marple. And I've had a little bit of trouble with Miss Marple in the past. Like, she has one really good book, The Body in the Library, I really liked. But then a couple of her other books, like Murder at the Vicarage and At Bertram's Hotel, I really didn't vibe with. I gave those books, I believe, 2.5 stars. But this one, to my surprise, was actually very good, very well told, basically just a classic Agatha Christie book. It didn't blow me away or anything, but I did give it 4 stars, not 5 stars. 4 stars. It was pretty good. I do think I want to try to get back into reading Agatha Christie. I miss her writing. I haven't really read her in before this book in like over a year. So I want to jump back into her writing. I might do something where like once a month I read another Agatha Christie book. I can also set up another poll to see which ones you want me to read. Let me know if you guys think that's a good idea. But anyway, I have hope now for Miss Marple because this was also a very good Miss Marple book. A Pocketful of Rye, 4 stars. The next book is a fairly popular book that I've seen the movie adaptation for. I believe it came out in like 2007. It's pretty good. But this is a book that one of my good buddies, Narsol from Discord, one of his all-time favorite authors, one of his all-time favorite books, he recently read it and really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it too, not to like the 5-star like God level that he thinks it is, but I gave it 4 stars, and that would be No Country for Old Men. I really enjoyed this book. It's the dialogue in this book was the best part of this book. Like whenever the characters are just like kind of like sitting around talking to each other is extremely well written. I will say, however, kind of the rest of the book, like the prose of the book, it kind of felt like just kind of like a standard like pulp westerny kind of book, like something you would have read like in the 50s or 60s, but with tremendous dialogue. Like it was kind of an interesting experience that way. But the story itself was pretty good. I was pretty invested. It's very short. I got through it in a day. The audiobook was very good. I highly recommend the audiobook because if you don't know, Cormac McCarthy kind of writes in a weird way where most of the time he doesn't use like dialogue tags or commas or anything. He just kind of just writes it bare bones, which reading it that way is not great, but if you do it through the audiobook, it's actually very easy to digest. But anyway, yeah, I did enjoy this book, No Country for Old Men. Narsal did recommend this to me as like a starting point for his writing. And the next one I'm going to read is The Road, because that's also apparently easier to digest than a lot of his books like Blood Meridian. I don't know when I'll get to that, but I am excited to get to it because I did pretty much enjoy this book. I gave it 4 stars. Oh, before I forget, I did listen to an audiobook that I don't have a physical copy of. So before I forget, I also read Survive the Night by Riley Sager. Now, I've recently read a Riley Sager book called Home Before Dark, which that one was very good. I gave it 4 stars. Survive the Night I liked slightly less. I gave it 3.5 stars, and I'll tell you why. The first half of the book was awesome, and I was very much anticipating the book being like a new favorite of mine. It's a very closed setting where you've got, basically it's 2 characters in a car driving, and the suspense builds when this one character realizes, or she thinks she realizes who this character is, and just, it's very palpable, the tension, and it's like a very closed setting, very claustrophobic, like how is she gonna get out of this situation? What is she gonna do? And so the first half of the book was really good. And then the second half of the book just turns into a convoluted mess for me, especially the ending. Like, it wasn't terrible, but it's really not the direction I wish the book would have went in. But apparently, Stacy says that that's Riley Sager's most, like, unpopular book. Like, people don't love that book. So she says that even if I somewhat enjoyed this book, which I did, that I shouldn't have a problem with the rest of his books. Like, the rest of his books should be either good or great. So that's good. But Survive the Night, like I said, the first half of the book was like chef's kiss. So good. And then the second half was just like, what is going on? Why are we doing this? This is so stupid. And the character makes such a stupid decision where you're like, really? Like, it's right there. What are you doing? So yeah, it was good, especially the first half, but second half, meh. All right, the next book I have to talk about is a sequel book that I gave 4 stars. I liked it slightly less than the first book, but still thought it was very good, and I can't wait to try out the third and final book in the trilogy. I think this month, actually. I don't know. I can't remember. But anyway, the book I'm talking about is She Dreams in Blood by Michael R. Fletcher, which is the second book in the, oh God, what's the series called? Obsidian Paths trilogy. That's what it is. That took me a minute. But the first book is called Blackstone Heart, which I gave 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed. The second book I also did very much enjoy. very fast-paced and same good character work. It kind of just felt like more of the same, though. I was hoping for something like, not like radically different, but something like a little bit more unique than the first book. It kind of felt more the same. The reason why I gave it 4 stars, though, is because the ending. A lot of shit happens at the end of the novel, and especially like the last like few pages. It's just like, what the hell is even happening here? I have no clue, and it sets up pretty well for the third book, because you're just like, I have to read the third book now, because like, what the hell just happened? So yeah, overall, I did very much enjoy this book. I liked it slightly less than the first book, and I'm hoping that the third book is even better. So yeah, She Dreams in Blood, 4 stars. The next book was an anticipated release for me for 2022. It's a book that came out like right at the tail end of March, and I read it like right at the beginning of April, by one of my all-time favorite science fiction authors, and that would of course be Until the Last of Me by Sylvain Neville, which is the second book in his new trilogy, Take Them to the Stars. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. I liked it slightly less than the first book, which I gave 4.5 stars. Deja vu. But anyway, I still really enjoyed it. My main problem still with this series in general is that the books just seem too short for me, which I know, like, I have very unpopular King opinions where I think his books are too long. It's very rare, though, when a book is, like, too short, where you're just like, it's really good, but I want more of it. At least for me. Because the first book was also that, it had that problem, because it was, like, about 300 pages. I was like, okay, maybe he could have added a bit more here. And usually when an author continues the series, the second and third books and continuing forward are longer. But the second book is actually shorter. And I was like, oh, man, there's a lot of scenes in here that I wish you would have fleshed out a bit more. But anyway, I still really enjoyed it. And the ending of the book is just so bonkers. You're just like, where the hell do we go from here? And I love Sylvain Neville because of that. Because his books are never simple. They're never like, okay, this is probably the plot points he's going to hit. Like, you read the end of this book and you're just like, fuck, where can we possibly go from here? And I can't wait till the third book comes out next year. Also, there's a cool Led Zeppelin tidbit in here where one of the characters says that he stole a bunch of money from Led Zeppelin, which that actually happened in real life. And that's another reason why I love this series to death, is because like he introduces like actual real historical events into the books. He weaves them in. Sylvain Neville is just so good. I just wish his books were longer. This book was 4 stars. And speaking of that book, one of the books that I gave 4.5 stars this month is the first book, A History of What Comes Next, by Sylvain Neville, of course. So yeah, I do like this book a little bit more than the second book. And this was a reread for me. I still loved it as much as the first time I read it. And of course, my main complaint is that it's not long enough, which I don't know if that's his doing or if it's the publisher's doing. Like, oh, you need to lower the word count. I don't really know, but I just wish that the books were longer. And like some of the scenes just feel kind of rushed, especially like the dramatic and chaotic moments. They're like 1 to 2 page chapters. I'm like you got to have a little bit more meat on the bones. But still, another reason why I love this series so much is just the main characters. Main characters do a great job. And also the audiobooks. I highly recommend the audiobooks. They do like a full cast kind of thing, just like with his previous series, The Themis Files. It's so good. I highly recommend this to anyone who has either like read The Themis Files and they're looking for something else to try by him, or if they're just a fan of like just fun, action-y sci-fi with great characters. Just so good. And I gave this book, A History of What Comes Next, 4.5 stars. The next book I have to talk about is Thinner by Richard Bachman, aka Stephen King. This is one of the books that me and Josephina are reading for our unofficial Richard Bachman read-along. And which one is this? This is the fourth one we're doing, I believe. Yeah, because it was in April, which is the fourth month of the year. Anyway, I really enjoyed this. I think I even enjoyed it more the second time around because, like with most of King's books, like this is a reread for me. I read it years and years ago, and I loved it back then, but now I'm thinking I love it slightly more. I really enjoyed it. I think me and Josephina have differing opinions, which is going to be fun when we eventually have our live show. I think she might have said that this is her least favorite so far, which for me, this is my second favorite, right behind Roadwork, which at least we both agree that Roadwork is the best, which not a popular opinion. Anyway, Thinner, I really liked. I gave it 4.5 stars. It's very well paced, which Josephina disagrees with me on. I think it's one of King's best paced books ever, which, you know, there's a huge problem with a lot of like longer King books for me. Like they just feel so unnecessarily long and dragged out. But this book just goes and goes, and I really like it. And yeah, I don't have too much to say other than that I really like it. I kind of want to save my thoughts for the live show, so if I'm being brief here, I'm sorry, but yeah, just know that I really liked it. It's one of my favorite Richard Bachman books, and Josephina is dead ass wrong. I'm kidding. All right, 3 more books to talk about, which I love all of these books. And this next book was also very fun for me, not because I love this author and I love this series and I love this book in particular, but I also read it to Stacy, and she's read the first 2 books, but she hadn't yet read this book. And I was super excited to read it to her. And that would be You Love Me by Caroline Kepnes. And this is the 3rd book in the Joel Goldberg series by Caroline Kepnes. And it was a lot of fun reading this to her because if you guys don't know, Joel Goldberg is sort of like this stalker character who's very creepy. And the way he narrates the books in the series is that he's talking in first person, but he's talking in second person to whoever it is that he's stalking in the book. So it's like, I think you're the one I spoke to on the phone, the librarian with the voice so soft that I went out and bought myself a cashmere sweater. So it's fun to like read that to someone, especially Stacy. That we had a lot of fun with this book. And yeah, it's my favorite in the series so far, but yeah, I love Joel Goldberg, I love Caroline Kepnes, and I cannot wait for the 4th book because the way that the 3rd book ends is crazy. And of course, you know, with each book, he kind of has to like move to a new location, a new city, and the city he ends up in is interesting. So yeah, I love this book. I love the series, and I love Stacy. Speaking of Stacy, I read one of her all-time favorite books. She pretty much just pushed me to read this book. She's like, you got to read this book, Jake. And I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. And I'm very glad she did because it was one of 2 5-star reads that I read this month. I gave this book 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was hilarious. It's called Hyperbole and a Half by Ali Broche, whatever. But it's basically kind of like a graphic novel in a way, where you get like these random, like badly drawn pictures, and she, like every chapter she's telling like a random, like real life story of stuff that's happened to her. And it's just so funny. Like the chapters are just hilarious. It's really hard to pick out like what my favorite chapter was. Like The Simple Dog, where she's just talking about her dog that's stupid, or The God of Cake, or the chapter where they get lost in the woods, or the parrot, or or the goose story where they have a goose like in their house. More dog stuff. Just the hot sauce. Oh man, this book is just so much fun. And yeah, I had a really good look at these stupid drawings. and like she tells stories with it along the way. It was a really good time. I'm glad she made me read it. I think she has another book that's not quite as good, but I'll probably still pick it up and read it anyway. But yeah, this was my second favorite book that I read this month. I'm very glad that she made me read it. But I do have one book that surpassed all of the books this month. Probably you guys know what it is because I've already put up a review for it on my channel. I really enjoyed it, and of course it is Douma Key by Stephen King. And like I said, I already put up a review for it on my channel, so I'm not going to talk about it too much in here. I will say though that this was the book that got picked for the Patreon wheel spin that I do every month for my patrons. They get to vote on which Stephen King book they want me to read every month. And yeah, this was the winner. And I'm very glad because it's one of my all-time favorite Stephen King books. Of course, I gave it 5 stars. And like I said, I go more in depth into it in my book review for it. So I'll of course leave that down in the doobly-doo for y'all to check out if you haven't checked it out already. And yeah, there's not too much more to say. It's my favorite book of the month. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, Douma Key, 5 stars. All right, so those are all of the books that I managed to get to in the month of April. Now, May might be a little different because, well, I'm starting pretty good right now. I'm getting some good reading in, but Stacy's actually going to be visiting me in the last few weeks of May, so I don't anticipate us getting a lot of reading done while she's here. So the May wrap-up will probably be a lot shorter. It will be a lot shorter because I think I talked about like 15 books in this wrap-up. Yeah, I'm not getting that much reading done in May. But yeah, so those were all the books that I managed to get to in the month of April. Please let me know if you've read any of these books before and what you guys thought of them, or if you're interested in trying them out. Please let me know all about that in the comments below. I'd love to chat with you guys about it. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and the Bookastronomer Discord. And if you'd like to further support me financially, go check out my Patreon page and see what that's all about. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching and have a terrific day.